I'm Eric from Alabama.
And I'm Gerry from Boston, Massachusetts. It's another Sunday podcast. Eric, my friend. Hello there.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I am doing well. It's another Sunday.
It is.
And things down in Alabama, how's the weather doing here near the end of, actually, we're at the end of January, if you can believe it. Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
It feels like it was just Christmas.
Yep. It's moving fast. So weather down here is okay. It's getting cold. It's cold right here now. But I know that's nothing for cold up y'all's way.
Yeah, cold for you guys is like 70.
No. No, it's been dropping into the 20s at night.
Yeah, that's probably what happens around winter. I was reading about the polar vortex, and I think we're gonna see something we probably saw back around 2014, 2015 with the cold air that just dropping down. It's gonna be crazy. Hey, we have a guest with us tonight. I thought it would be kind of fun to bring a topic on the show tonight that most of the people in the country have no idea what we're talking about. Candlepin bowling. Now, I know you saw it when you came up here to visit, and you were like amazed. I mean, how would you describe your first thought when you walked in?
Well, you took me to the bowling alley. You may have even given me a disclaimer beforehand about the Candlepin bowling. I think you told me, like, this is what it is or whatever. But I walked in there and I noticed, a bowling alley, but the bowling pins were all like really skinny, like toilet paper tubes, or paper towel tubes.
Absolutely.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Well, candlepins, they're like candles.
Yeah. I'm like, wait a minute, what is that? So then that's when I learned about Candlepin bowling.
So 45 years ago, I started as a junior bowler in this bowling alley, and still working there. Primarily, still working there today. With COVID and everything, there's a bunch of different things going on. But so I haven't been there in a while. But I have known this guy for more than 40 years. So let's bring him on right now. Tom Giordano, Wakefield Bowladrome. Hello there.
Hi, Gerry.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
Say hello to my co-host, Eric, down in Alabama.
Eric, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you, Tom?
Good. Those toilet paper tubes you're talking about. They run about 15 inches tall by almost 2¼ inches wide, and that's why you probably assimilate them to a toilet paper tube,
Well, we have different kind of toilet paper down here in Alabama.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to come on. I thought it would be fun.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I thank you. I thought it would be fun to have you come on, and we have listeners who are all over the country here. It's California to Maine to Florida. They're everywhere. And a lot of folks don't know about Candlepin bowling, so I thought it would be fun. And Eric and I talked about bringing you on to maybe tell us a little bit about Candlepin bowling, what it is, the history, where it got started, and then kind of go from there. What do you think?
I'm ready for you.
All right. Tell us all about Candlepin bowling.
As far as I've read, the biggest participation sport in the world in history. That's a little nugget for you. Candlepin is a variation of bowling. The most prominent is 10-pin bowling, and that's the one you see on most of the country. The big ball with the holes in it and the pins, the fat-looking pin. A deviation of that was invented in 1880 by a Justin P. White, who was a bootmaker, worked in a boot factory. There was some junk that he had to get rid of in the factory, and there were spindles, and he just happened to take them at the time and set them up in the same format or same pattern as 10 pins, and it became a game. Not very sophisticated. At that point, the pin was probably a 1-inch diameter, more like a broomstick that had to be stood up. That went on for a while until he finally, in 1893, teamed up with a guy named Jack Morrissey. And this guy, Jack, he's the one that finally standardized the game with the pin as we have it now, the 15 3/4 inch by 2.5 inch, tapered at the ends a bit. And the ball is 4.5 inches in diameter, and it only weighs 2 pounds, 5 ounces. Of course, no holes in it. It's held with the hand just with a single grip. I think those are the two weirdest things about the game compared to 10 pin. He invented it in Massachusetts, actually, in Worcester. It's played on a 60-foot lane, 42-inch width. Uniquely, the pins are a foot apart on center, and they're set up in a triangle.
Socially distanced.
That would be 6 feet apart.
And the uniqueness of this game, now picture, after someone rolls the ball in 10 pin, the pin setter automatically comes down, sweeps any felled pins away, and then puts the pins back on their original spots. Unlike Candlepin Bowling, where everything that is felled is playable. This is called wood. Once a pin falls over and it's on the pin deck, anything that is contacted on the pin deck is considered fair. And all these pins that are laying there are playable, which makes for a dynamic game. I mean, the way the pins bounce around. And I think this is what attracts people to this game, because the variation of play is that anything can happen at any time. In 10 pin, it's pretty straightforward. You got your 7-10 split, and you got your knockouts and stuff like that. But with Candlepin, with all these different variations that can be created with the wood, as we call it, on the pin deck, it's limitless as to, what you can do on that pin deck with a ball. In Candlepin, you throw 3 balls as opposed to 2. That was made infamous in a episode of The Simpsons. Homer comes to Boston and he goes to a bowling alley. Actually, the facade of the bowling alley happens to be the facade of the Wakefield Bowladrome. The producers of the Simpsons, the Farley brothers, are from the North Shore and here in Massachusetts, and they took pictures of our bowling establishment and used it in the episode of The Simpsons. Homer is ecstatic because after 2 balls, he's disappointed that he didn't get as many pins down as he would like, and the proprietor of the Bowladrome tells him, "Well, Homer, you got 1 more ball." And he can't believe it because here he is. He's got three bowling balls. Another thing that's very interesting, of course, to accommodate this game, they had to reinvent the machine to set up the pins. Of course, when the game was invented, everything was pin boys. Straddling 2 lanes, setting the pins up by hand on what was supposed to be the same spots every time, but nothing was standardized, and of course, trying to get out of the way before the guy would throw the ball was a hazard. So sometimes the pins were set up haphazardly. Actually, in 1917, during World War I, they actually had pin girls. Bowling was so popular at the time that when all the pin boys went off to war, the job, like other jobs in this country, got dumped on women, and they were pin girls at the time. But then in 1949, a guy named Howard Dowd from Everett, Massachusetts, teamed up with Lionel Barrow, and they had a few prototypes of a machine that could set these pins up. From there, it just took off. The game just went nuts. The first bowling alley with pin setters was actually in Newburyport, Mass, in 1952. And it was owned by a guy named Paul Tendorf. It was a mixed bag of pocket billiards. That was almost new at the time also, because billiards was a game that didn't have holes in it in the beginning. So they had the pocket pool and they had Candlepin Bowling in the same establishment. They called these places bowladromes, sort of a fancy word for bowling alley.
I can remember my dad telling me stories about being a pin boy in the facility that you own now. Back in the day before, when the first owner had it, and used to tell me stories about trying to straddle the two lanes, and pin would be like flying up. He would go home every now and then with some bruises and some swollen legs and ankles and things like that, and I think he told me stories about some of that. When the matches were over, they would send tips down. They'd be throwing like nickels and dimes.
Correct.
Like he'd come home with like 30 cents. He was like ecstatic.
Correct. They would make 10 cents a string. When we opened our doors in 1953, the proprietor had to charge 15 to 20 cents a string, or maybe 30 cents a string, and the pin boy got a dime. But that was as high as it went, because then the pin setters came in.
I do some reenacting, and I know one of the games that they used to play like back in the 1700s was tabletop 9-pins. And I think it was kind of like that, where it was played on a tabletop, and it was like a tavern game, a bar game. And it was just 9 pins set up, kind of similar to like a candlepin bowling. And you had a little tiny ball that you would roll across the table and get it,
Sure.
It was very similar to that. I was wondering if maybe...
So many variations. Skittles, 5-pin, 3-pin, duck pin. All these are all variations.
It sounds like y'all were a very central part of the community of Wakefield there. Was that a Massachusetts thing, or was that only in Wakefield? Was that particular to Wakefield, or was...
Well, the first lanes that were ever exhibited, the first automatic lanes that were ever exhibited, were set up in Walham Park.
Oh, yes. Walham Park,
yeah.
Yes.
I mean, it was an amusement park, and they were actually set up, in something that might house the bumper cars or something like that.
So Candlepin Bowling is limited to a certain region. Where would folks find it? It's not all over the country.
It's New England and the Canadian Maritime area. At one time, I think we had 198 establishments in the organization, which turns out to be thousands of lanes. But now, I think the Mass Association is down, it's less than 20 establishments.
And that was 198 just in Massachusetts?
No, that was in New England. Yeah.
In New England.
But then again, it didn't, you might get a few in Vermont. New Hampshire had more than Vermont, but no place had it like Massachusetts. I mean, Lynn, Mass at one time, I think they said had nine bowling alleys. The last lane in Worcester just closed this past summer. Economics, everything takes a toll. It's a very expensive game, meaning it's very expensive to play. Your square footage, okay? You can't make a lot of money on it for the square footage that it takes to play it. Bowling alleys get torn down for high rises because there's so much land in the footprint of the bowling alley. And again, land is worth worth a lot, you know. Right now, as far as we're concerned in Wakefield, we're just sort of like the keepers of the gate. We love doing what we're doing there. We still have a lot of community camaraderie, so that's one thing that keeps us going. And we're lucky enough to pay our bills and keep our head above water. Of course, that was until this COVID mess, you know. But God willing, and if the creek don't rise, we'll get through this too. I'm hoping, again, with the season being the way it is, come September 2021, that we'll be able to get back to a full season of bowling and let people come back and participate in the game they truly love.
We're talking with Tom Giordano, proprietor of the Wakefield Bowladrome in Wakefield, Massachusetts, one of the few Candlepin bowling establishments left in all of New England.
So why is Candlepin bowling only in New England?
Basically, because of the popularity of it in the 1800s. It actually warded off 10-pin. They were looking for vast areas where they could build these massive bowling alleys with bars and restaurants and everything. And that type of area wasn't available for them in New England, where in the cities where they wanted to get to the people, everything was so crowded, they didn't really have the area, or the land was too expensive to build their massive complexes. But see, in New England, you had in the inner cities, the way they were, it was more or less a blue-collar game, and all these bowling alleys were in these little nooks and crannies that actually the 10-pin proprietors didn't want to deal with, you know? So they were going way out, out of the state and finding places where they could build the bigger bowling alleys. And that was basically it. And of course, the popularity. I mean, the game just took off. I mentioned how you can play the wood on the pin deck and bounce the pins around. The action is phenomenal compared to 10-pin. Everybody bowls a 310-pin. There has never, ever been a 300 game in Candlepin. I think the highest game ever bowled is maybe a 248. So much so that a perfect game in Candlepin is considered when there are no pins left on the deck. In other words, I throw 3 balls, I knock down all 10 pins, and I repeat that 10 times. That's considered a perfect game. No pins left standing is considered a perfect game in Candlepin, whereas a 300 game is considered a perfect game in 10-pin. And, people have numerous 300 patches on their bowling shirts because, not that it's easy to do, but it's a more likely occurrence than even getting a perfect game in Candlepin. The 248 wasn't even a perfect game. A perfect game could be as low as 100.
So essentially, it's 10 pins in every frame, or what we call in Candlepin bowling boxes. It's 10 pins in every
correct
felled in every frame for 10 frames. So I've always wondered this, where we have a smaller roughly 2.5 pound ball, smaller pins. Why wouldn't something like this take off in other parts of the country, or maybe even for folks who can't lift a 10 or 12 or 16 pound ball? Why do you think Candlepin bowling? Why couldn't I go to Florida and open a Candlepin lane and be successful down there? I would think it would be easier and enjoyable for folks, especially a senior citizens population.
Basically, it's the exposure. At one time, they actually tried it. There is a Candlepin bowling alley in California. I forget where it is. They tried it in Florida a couple of times, which, to be honest with you, I don't understand why it's not more popular down there with all the snowbirds migrate from New England down to Florida. But I have to tell you, I have relatives from Long Island, New York, and they would come out here and laugh. I mean, it was crazy. They would come to the Bowladrome, and they're taking pictures. I still have people come in today. They might not bowl, but they sure want to take a lot of pictures of it so they can show their friends when they get back to wherever they're going. But we just never had the national exposure that 10-pin had. You know,
Right.
I mean, they would set up in convention centers and have tournaments in Las Vegas and all that kind of stuff, you know. Again, it was just a regional type game. Actually did very well for being as regional as it was. I mean, there are other types of bowling. You know, you could do another story about duck pin bowling if you went down to Jersey and Maryland. You know what I'm saying? That's a regional game to them. But Candlepin harkens back to the day of, again, just, you know, being able to put a bowling alley almost anywhere.
Tom, you're so full of information. This has been a great interview. I appreciate you taking the time. Before we wrap it up here, we're at the end of our time here. Eric, have any final questions?
Well, yeah. I mean, it seems like you said that there were only 20 Candlepin bowling places in y'all's association now, and you were talking about how it's very much a cultural and kind of community thing, and it seems like y'all are really kind of, like you said, you know, the keepers of the gate and kind of holding on to that tradition, which I think is great and wonderful to keep that and preserve that for future generations. And
I don't feel like an owner as much as I feel like a curator. You know, I have people coming in. We haven't really modernized our establishment. People use the term retro. My wife and kids might say old, you know. But a lot of the people come in. We still have a lot of paneling and fiberglass around, very 50s and 60s looking, and that's one of the things that draw the people in also.
yeah,
And we actually keep score with a pencil and a paper.
That's true. You know, that was my last comments here were when folks come in, especially in the summertime when people are visiting New England and Massachusetts and have never seen Candlepin bowling, we get a lot of visitors that would come in, and I used to describe it as we're one step above Pinboy. And it's great. I mean, we've seen pictures of the facility in various
Publications.
Internet publications and internet. I mean, I know we were in, was it Life magazine or Time magazine or something one time, and so it's kind of an attraction, and it is sort of like a museum that people can still come in and actually enjoy. Tom, this has been awesome. I know you weren't quite sure that you would be able to spend a lot of time or have a lot of information, but you have, as I knew you would, and I do appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thanks, Jerry. One thing I would like to get out there is anytime any of your listeners are in the metropolitan Boston area, we're not far. I mean, Massachusetts is not a big place. Just look us up. Wakefield, Massachusetts, Wakefield Bowladrome. Thank you.
We're going to put the Wakefield Bowladrome and the address and all the information in the description of this podcast. Once this COVID pandemic thing has kind of gone by and things are back to normal, and folks listening do visit Boston, please, come to Wakefield. It's a great little town. There's 2 beautiful lakes in town that you can walk around. There's a lot of other nice restaurants and things here in town as well. And of course, you got to make a stop in to Wakefield Bowladrome and say hello to Tom, who is usually behind the desk more than I've ever been behind the desk. So
I wish you were there more.
I can't wait. Vaccinations are coming. I'll be back. I miss you, and I miss everybody else who has been down there. But we'll get through this hopefully very, very, very quickly. That's Tom Giordano, everybody. Wakefield Bowladrome in Wakefield, Massachusetts. Again, we'll put the information on Candlepin Bowling and the Wakefield Bowladrome in the description of this podcast. Eric, it was awesome to have Tom come on and tell us about a sport that you would probably never heard of until you visited.
Yeah, well, I had seen it, and y'all had told me about it, and but now I have a new appreciation for the sport. So that was really good. Thank you, Tom.
All righty. Once again, thanks to everyone who's listening. If you have any comments on today's show or any of our shows, or you have an idea or want to be a part of our show, please send us an email. It's anothersundaypodcast@gmail.com. It's anothersundaypodcast@gmail.com. Eric, final word to you.
You know what I'm going to say, Jerry. Roll with the changes.
It's Another Sunday Podcast. It's produced by Erich and Gerry. Technical advisor Tom Bilodeau. Music composed and performed by Tom Blaze. Check out Tom Blaze's YouTube channel. That's going to do it for this episode of It's Another Sunday Podcast. Thanks for listening.